in an effort to put an end to ongoing efforts to move Kentucky's capital from Frankfort to another location, usually Lexington or Louisville. The framers of the Constitution provided in Section 255 that Frankfort would remain the capital unless two-thirds of each house of the First General Assembly, which convenes after the adoption of this Constitution, should vote for removal. At that first session, legislators waged a fierce battle over the capital removal question, and pro-removal forces garnered more than two-thirds majority support in the House of Representatives, but failed to muster such a majority for any single alternative location. Therefore, the capital remained in Frankfort. The final sections of the Constitution, 256 to 263, concern the mode of revision of the Constitution. The current Constitution is the first Kentucky Constitution to provide for revision by individual amendment. Previous charters did not provide for this process, probably because their drafters feared that slavery might be abolished or compromised by an amendment. Section 256 requires that 3/5 of all the members of each house propose amendments. So 3/5 of the senators and 3/5 of the House has to propose the amendments. Then once the legislature passes it, the governor signs off on it. It goes to the ballot for the voters to ratify it. Once the voters vote for it, and then it becomes law. Okay? That's when an amendment becomes law. Proposed amendments, now that you can have up to a maximum of 4, are submitted to the voters at the next general election for members of the General Assembly, and if the majority of voters vote to ratify, a ratified amendment becomes part of the Constitution. The Court of Appeals ruled that the submission of proposed amendments cannot be postponed until a later general election for representatives. So the very first next election is when the ballot initiative or the ballot referendum gets on the general election ballot. Sections 258 to 63 concern legislative proposals to call a constitutional convention and require the support of a majority of all members of each house for 2 successive sessions. So the majority, actually it's less than an amendment, so if you can get the support of a majority of all the members of each house, so the majority of the House, majority of the Senate, they can put it for 2 successive sessions, so 2 times in a row. If a convention cause proposed, a majority of the voters equal to 1/4 of the number of qualified voters who voted at the last preceding general election. Constitutional convention does not sound impossible. I mean, it has sounded in the past that it's been pretty hard to do, but if you can get half the members of the House, half the members of the Senate, and then for 2 successive sessions. So once you get it for 2 successive sessions, you know, this year they vote for a constitutional convention, next year they vote for a constitutional convention, then a constitutional convention either happens or no, it goes. If a constitutional cause proposed, a majority of the voters then have to vote for it. Then the Constitutional Convention develops the new Constitution. And that's revolutionary. New Constitution is revolutionary. So you have, let's review, okay? So how do you get a constitutional convention in Kentucky? Theoretically, if I'm saying I'm sick of Frankfort, well, you got to get all the majority of the senators on board, the majority of the people in the House, so that's 38 senators, that'd be 19 senators, you would at least need 20 senators, and then you would need 51 representatives. So once you have the majority of both houses, they call for it 2 years in a row. Then once a convention call is proposed, and it's proposed to the ballot. So the 2004 legislature says, okay, let's have a constitutional convention. 2015, let's have a constitutional convention. That's not an election year, so we have to wait till 2016, presented to the voters, and then they will vote whether or not they want to elect delegates and to start an entire constitutional convention. It's not a bad idea. Kentucky's document is outdated, 1891. A lot of it's been gutted, it's butchered. There's a lot of problems with it, a lot of good strengths to it, a lot of problems with it, and I feel like the good things keep, and then the problems throw out, you know. So instead of having judicial administration designed by a 1975 amendment, actually have that codified into the Constitution. Instead of having a list of statutes in the Constitution, actually just make a sort of the framework, a skeleton framework from which other laws can be later on filled in. So the KRS website, I think that's great. You can fill in just like that and have different subsections, and you can, you know, I just it's a brave new world, and I'm not for sure why we would hold on to an 1891, you know, document. So the sections 258 to 63 concern legislative proposals. right? So, okay, and then once you give it to the majority of the voters, so you get the House, both houses for 2 successive sessions to vote for a constitutional convention, then it goes to the voters, and it has to be equal to 1/4. The majority of the voters equal to 1/4 of the number of qualified voters who voted in the last preceding general election. So 25% of Kentuckians vote. So in the last preceding general election, 1/4 of the number of qualified voters had to have voted in this constitutional convention vote. And if at least 1/4 of the many people in the general election vote, so majority of the voters, it seems like that should be easy to get a majority of those voters in the next regular election to be held for state officers or House members must approve the call in order for a convention to be convoked. The voters have rejected all 4 convention calls proposed under the current Constitution. So that's how it would happen. This year they would vote for it, next year they would vote for it, and then 2016 it would be on the ballot, and then once the Constitutional Convention was convened, then you would have to elect delegates and then have people actually write the damn thing. And then I guess you would have to get that thing proposed. So once the Constitutional Convention, you'll get one written, right, and it'd be presented to the people, and then they'll approve it or reject it. And then maybe that might be the last chance, you know, that could be it. So Constitutional Convention is not a bad idea. You can have some house cleaning things. Hang on to some of the sacred sections, the Bill of Rights, the Section 4, all the freedoms. None of the freedoms will be diminished. There definitely will be a Bill of Rights. It needs to be guaranteed and promised to the people. Do not take away the individual freedoms. They are superior. All other laws are subordinate to the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights need to be guaranteed into the Constitution. Keep the ones that we got now. Maybe clean them up a little bit, write them up a little bit better, a little bit nicer, and have a Bill of Rights. And have an amendment where you can actually add to the Bill of Rights. Because I like the amendment process when you add to the freedoms and the individual rights, but in terms of like changing the fucking document, changing this wording and this wording there, it gets to be cumbersome to be able to figure it all out. If there wasn't a big-ass document that Frankfurt produced for everybody, I'm not for sure if everybody would be on the same page about what law is and what isn't. So Kentucky's Constitution, understandably detailed given the unwillingness of the legislature to reform itself during the period of the Third Constitution and given the complexities of governance that emerged by 1890, has, through amendment and judicial interpretation, become a more efficient charter that is generally well suited to meet the challenges that confront the 21st century Commonwealth. During the first century of Kentucky statehood, reformers were able to cure constitutional deficiencies by drafting and adopting entirely new constitutions. The framers of the Fourth Constitution wisely provided for an amendment process of legislative popular ratification that has facilitated periodic modernization of the charter, which would have been difficult to achieve by the 19th century convention process given the reluctance of post-19th century voters to approve convention calls. Flexible judicial interpretation of the current Constitution has also helped modernize the charter, as well as establish certain personal liberties not found in the U.S. Constitution. Just as Kentucky's constitutions borrowed from and in many ways resemble the constitutions of other states, Pennsylvania being the biggest one, 1790 Pennsylvania, so too its revisions, such an integrated judiciary and the elimination of superfluous sections on corporations likewise fit within the mainstream of recent state constitutional reform. The decisions of the Supreme Court of Kentucky have found rights in the state constitution not found in the federal charter, also fit with the mainstream of state judicial rulings nationally. In short, Kentucky Constitution occupies a significant place in the legal fabric of the Commonwealth, a significance that is shared by virtually all the state charters of the nation. So that's the Kentucky Constitution. Again, you know, to sort of wrap up, there's something redundant, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press. You know, a lot of these freedoms we'll see double jeopardy. We'll see these again in Kentucky's Constitution, but Kentucky does expand the rights. The list that it actually came up with, and there's more to it, so it's not just this, but Section 2 basically denies all type of oppressors ever saying any absolute and arbitrary power. So all bosses, all dictators, all governors, all mayors, all executive positions of all kinds, teachers, bosses, political establishment, military, absolute and arbitrary power is denied. So unless there is an immediate goal and the goal is understood by all involved, you can't just have absolute and arbitrary power just because you're an asshole and you want everybody to comply with you. That's illegal. You can't do that. So a lot of the school system is authoritarian, totalitarian, fascist. that's illegal. You can't have absolute and arbitrary fascist power over, you know, the rights of children. So that goes against Section 2, but it's a real generic section. So Section 3, the right to revoke corporate charters. So you can just say, you know, get the fuck out of here, corporation. Section 4, right to violently overthrow the government or by any peaceful means. So they was able to get a statute to try to get a revision instead of doing a constitutional convention. Just do the Constitutional Convention. I think it's actually very doable, very possible. It's codified right into the actual document. It only takes about 3 or 4 years to get it done, and then once it's done, it'll be changed forever. And it's only inevitable that it's going to happen again, right? Section 6 says free and equal elections. Section 9 says juries decide libel cases, not the judge. The truth is an acceptable defense for libel. Section 12 says all cases indicted for felonies need to be brought before the grand jury. The Section 14, the right of judicial remedy by the courts. So if you've got a problem, something happens to your reputation or your property or your person, then you have the right of judicial remedy by the courts. You have a right to complain, and then to have that complaint followed up by investigations, and hopefully if you were actually wronged, justice would be administered. You have a right to never go to prison for any debt. So if you ever get into debt with anybody, bankers, anybody, for any reason, they don't have a right to put you in prison. The Section 21 gives you the right to commit suicide with no punishment. They basically treat you as if you had died naturally. Section 22, no standing armies are prohibited unless the General Assembly says otherwise. So no standing armies. You can't have just people with guns and military just standing around waiting to fight. You actually have to have purpose. They have to have like real purpose, right? And so other rights and freedoms that you have have a right to, there's no hereditary nobility, so there's no king or queen, and no their kids can ever fucking just get some free office. So we don't do that sort of monarchy English fucking bullshit, or French or whoever still has a king and queen. For Canada, they still got, you know, Australia, they listen to the fucking British queen. So the right to immigrate out of state at any time that you want to fucking just get the fuck out of Kentucky, you're allowed to do that. And then the right to be free from slavery. So slavery is illegal in Kentucky, right? So, yay. And all these things are good things, you know, for many reasons. But most especially because of all the fucking problems that Kentucky has. Kentucky has got so many problems. I mean, you could just, you know, make a list of them. And actually, I didn't make a list. I wrote like about 20 pages about the subject, about Kentucky statistics. And really, Kentucky is a failed state, failed civilization. It's on the bottom of the barrel. And so we could use these freedoms and liberties in order to, you know, move our civilization forward. And hopefully not just be like, you know, comparably like, you know, some of the, you know, the worst states in the nation. And so I compiled like 29 statistics, a lot of things I remember off the top of my head. 2 out of 5 Kentuckians can't read, and the children of Kentucky, they're the 10th smartest in the entire nation. So we got some of the smartest children coming up against some of the stupidest adults. That's Kentucky. So that's you know, there's a lot of counter-currents. There was racism, but there's a lot of anti-racist. The first state in the South to pass the Civil Rights Act, the first state in the South to get an interracial college, Berea College. We passed civil rights in 1966. Martin Luther King marched on Frankfurt, and we got it. So there's a lot of possibilities, right, out there. So not only is there, we have, you know, those issues, but we have more issues than just that. Shit. So I'm trying to find, yeah, okay, so just a minute, I'm going to actually go through the rankings real fast. So we got all these health problems and shit, but I compiled like a short little list here that you can read it straight down. So we're the #1 worst run state in 2010, #1 state in America for oral cavity cancer, #1 nationally for binge drinking, #1 for toxic air pollution, #1 for colorectal cancer, #1 for lung cancer deaths, #1 nationally to have the least likely to have healthy habits such as eating healthy, exercise, and not smoking, #1 for lung and bronchitis cancer, #1 nationally for overall toothlessness, #1 in America for colon and rectum cancer incidence, #1 nationally for toothlessness for folks 65 and older in 2004, #1 in America for having the worst emotional well-being, 2012, #1 nationally for having the fastest growing prison in industrial complexes, 2009. That was done by the Pew Center research thing. Number 1 in America for maintaining the filthiest, dirtiest public spaces. Number 1 nationally. Highest rate of child deaths from abuse and neglect, 2007. Number 1 worst state for animal abuse, 4 years in a row, 2007 to 2010. So the rankings and the statistics just go on and on and on. And I'm going to run out of time here, so I won't even be able to get to name all the things. But I mean, they keep on going. We have the number 1 ranking for. I mean, all these cancer deaths are just like disturbing and sickening. But the top poorest states, worst state for American women to live, 4th nationally, lowest median house income. So, we're poor, sick, and dumb. We have all these problems. Racists kind of took over after the Civil War. They've been controlling shit for a long-ass time. Fascism, capitalism, we could do better. We got more freedom. Go Kentucky. Woo!